So welcome to another episode of the Spone Train podcast. I have on as a guest today, the hypnotist. I trained with him in Toronto. Your book, Reality is Plastic, is one of the first books that I actually listened to on hypnosis. Actually, probably the first book.
Good.
Welcome, Anthony Jacquin. How are you today?
Thanks for having me, Nick. Good to see you here. I'm very well.
Yeah, so we spent a couple days together in Toronto doing some training. You were teaching as a guest for Mike Mandel. And then your dad and I got to spend some time together in Vegas. So you had the way that you and your dad taught was brilliantly simple and things were so easy to apply in hypnosis and NLP and all of these change work principles that it was amazing. So talk to me about, I guess, your background in hypnosis and how you took all of these complex principles and made them kind of easy to understand.
Sure. Okay. Well, I've been into this quite a while. I'll keep the history relatively short. But when my dad first got into hypnosis around 94, 95, I was at university and he was so excited about it. He almost immediately just said, check this stuff out, and shared the materials that he'd got from his course. And I started playing around with it. I got lucky. My first few sessions, they're all therapy sessions. I didn't do any performance or anything like that at that point, was successful. So someone quit smoking and someone, got signed by Unleashing in a studio, and I immediately had the bug for it. So, my dad and I had each other to confide in and share experiences with each other. And that's how it continued over the next few years. He got into full-time therapy. I, had a series of other jobs after university, but was still obsessed with this. And the dot-com crash, you may be too young to understand.
No, I remember that.
But, when lastminute.com kind of led the charge and there was this mass investment, I was doing something related to what I'd studied, which was geographical information systems. I worked for a company called Where on Earth, who had essentially the location piece, like where's my nearest. And they were telling us that, in the future, you'll have 3G phones that will allow you to kind of, know where you are. I was doing that for a few years and then was eventually made redundant from this company that was sort of being bought out. So I went for it and I got into full-time therapy in 2001. Got busy straight away, did thousands, maybe 5,000 sessions, just like non-stop, especially quitting smoking, lots of stuff for, various kinds of fear, phobia, anxiety, that kind of stuff. And just, again, managed to kind of bang out the 10,000 hours, as people say. By that time my dad was training and teaching this to other people as well. So we joined forces eventually. My dad did his initial course, immediately taught me what he knew. I had a go at college and had success with it, which, buoyed my enthusiasm. Later on, I'd done a series of other jobs, but was eventually made redundant from one of those jobs during the dot-com crash. And I went for it, became a full-time therapist in 2001. I immediately got busy. Maybe it was in fashion at the time or something, but I was immediately inundated. My dad had a bit of a system running to get clients. We guaranteed our work. And I just, over the next 10 years, worked my way through, 5,000 clients. Lots of quit smoking, lots of therapy stuff. And then my dad was kind of, during that period, my dad started training. We joined forces and started running just hypnotherapy courses, like a 40-hour training in the system he had developed. And around 2004, I'd started getting an interest, not so much in becoming a performer, but doing performance hypnosis, just because I wanted to explore with it. I had this opportunity with a TV company to make a teaser. They were trying to get a program commissioned. And that video is still out there, called Hypno Survival. I was essentially asked to, survive by hypnotizing people and stealing their things and getting free. So it was just for research purposes, but it all came off. My view of what was possible with hypnosis, expanded during that experience. And I did some training in stage hypnosis and got into performance. And eventually, with a group of other enthusiasts, we really dug into, I guess, what's now called street hypnosis, but impromptu hypnosis. We started doing that, going out every weekend, sometimes with a camera, sometimes without. And eventually I started teaching performers, magicians at first, mentalists, how to integrate hypnosis with their work. And that's what I do now. I go around the world, I teach hypnosis and hypnotherapy, sometimes, in workshops and lectures, sometimes in more extended courses. I consult for a variety of performers, but especially magicians, mentalists who'd like to integrate hypnosis either into their method or openly, in terms of one of the skills that they have. And I love it, man. My life is hypnosis. I've fully escaped real life, and along the way produced a few products. You mentioned my book, Reality is Plastic. It's still, sells very well. It's now available on Audible, but I have video trainings and hypnotism conferences that I've curated. So yeah, I love it.
So the demonstrational stuff is probably what you're most known for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in Reality is Plastic, you talk a lot about those demonstrational principles. And your YouTube videos, I watch that stuff where you walk into a bar and you hypnotize somebody to think that you're Denzel Washington. You get free drinks, and it's amazing your ability to do that. And I think what sets you apart is the idea that I don't know if you coined this phrase, but to be the hypnotist, right? To just embody that, to live that, and hanging out with you in Toronto, you hypnotized everybody we were with. It's just how you lived. And same with your dad, right? And that was really cool, because I hadn't spent a lot of time around people that just hypnotized everybody everywhere they went.
Yeah. Well, actually, that video, which is still the video that's probably most people speak about most, but that was the first time I'd really done that. I've done a few impromptu sessions just because I was trying to express a technique, but that was the first time we'd really gone out on a proper mission to create some chaos with it in that way. So what you're seeing there is the first time I really walked up to someone stone cold and did a handshake induction. It just worked, it just came off. So there's that. But yeah, I look at hypnosis as a collaborative experience, however it's presented, whatever kind of mask I may put on that. I see the whole thing as collaborative. That doesn't quite just mean people are pretending. It's a bit more nuanced than that. But what that means is when it comes to giving, just giving demonstrations, just hypnotizing people, if you're out, if you're having dinner, if you're in a bar, if you're on an airplane, whatever, it's never really defined how far down that path of hypnotic phenomena you're going to go. And demonstrations can be very light. They can take 30 seconds, 60 seconds, a couple of minutes, or they can get pretty deep and more extended. So, that, I think that helps kind of sharpen your axe as a hypnotist. It's not that it takes radically different skills or radically different techniques. It doesn't. There's a lot of crossover in the technique between even the stuff I do in therapy. And I think part of my, part of what gives me comfort to be able to do impromptu hypnosis is that if I'm not promising you, I'm saying, let me show you something interesting about yourself. And part of the confidence to do that came from my dad's system in hypnotherapy that has this notion of kind of built-in testing, the use of ideomotor movements, creating catalepsy and challenging what you've created to enhance the hypnotic experience that people have in therapy. So it kind of goes beyond just relaxation. Because I'd worked hard to establish those basic physical hypnotic phenomena with people in therapy for years. When it came to actually having fun with it and working with a group all at once, the numbers suddenly feel like they're on your side. I know some stage hypnotists who've only ever worked with large groups, the thought of hypnotizing someone in an impromptu fashion kind of does give them some fear and doubt.
Yeah.
They feel that they need to crunch a room of 100 or 500 or whatever. But I think every hypnotherapist can benefit from at least doing that a few times, saying yes to the question, oh, can you hypnotize me? Or you're not going to hypnotize me, are you? You know, they should be able to step up and demonstrate something. It certainly doesn't put people off the notion of seeking therapy. I know for a fact you'll become, you know, not just a better hypnotist and hypnotherapist, but you'll have more flexibility in how you present. And for that reason, I encourage, you know, all hypnotherapists to play around with hypnotic phenomena.
Well, and one thing that you do really well, and I think this can help a lot of people, whether they're in sales or pickup or, you know, anything, is how you frame it, right? So when you go into a hypnotic, you know, a situation or you're meeting somebody, the way that you frame it comes across as like, oh, this is going to be fun. We're going to try something. You're managing expectations. You're building rapport. You're doing all the things before you even get into hypnosis, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the frames that I, you know, worked through and held on to quite tightly originally just fell over eventually. They turned out not to be necessary. And that again, that gave me a bit more flexibility. But the way I look at it is, this doesn't require a special brain. It doesn't really require a special imagination. This is an experience any human being can have. Certainly, some people are, I'm talking about the subject now, some of them are naturally skilled. They wouldn't know it until they play this game.
Right.
And some need a bit more time and training. So because I don't feel like it's something I do to people, that takes a lot of the pressure off. You know, again, it's like, let me show you something. Let me show you what happens when you do this and you use your imagination. The other thing is, not that we need to, but I know for a fact, we don't need to present this as hypnosis. We don't need to put that label on it. You know, hypnosis is essentially a label we're putting on an experience or on a particular kind of behavior. And it works well without it. I mean, yes, if I want to give a demonstration, I'll say the H word because it focuses attention and it taps into some cultural suggestions that are likely to be already there. I'm genuinely excited about it as well. I know that this can be a profound experience. Again, even the basic stuff, things like having your hand stuck to a table or not being able to say your own name for a minute or so. It sounds silly, but that, even if the participant struggles to make sense of that, they know that's out of the ordinary. Something has happened there. So it's not that I'm trying to build rapport in any of the ways of like mirroring and matching and using body language and listening to their language predicates and none of that stuff. It's more just like blind enthusiasm. You know, let me show you something interesting. If I'm excited about it, other people tend to, you know, at least pick up on some of that. So yeah, it's just too good to put down.
Yeah, and framing it as, oh, let me show you the power of your mind instead of hypnosis, right? People tend to maybe put a guard up sometimes when we use the word hypnosis without needing to, because it's just a set of phenomena that we experience on our own. And I know we've talked about this before, but there's really no agreement even on what hypnosis is, right?
There's no consensus. I mean, there are some strong and, you know, likely to be partially correct theories, and there's a vast amount of scientific research and debate about those theoretical rationales. It doesn't really matter which one we cling to. I'm always happy to have that kind of discussion and debate. But you're right, there's no real agreement. And again, you mentioned using this in other contexts where perhaps we don't want to present this as hypnosis. I don't think it's deceptive, by the way, to not use the word hypnosis or not call it that way. At that point, it's just communication. It's just influence. It's just persuasion. It's just knowing something extra about the human condition that can allow you to communicate more effectively, and perhaps persuade someone, or show someone rather how to have a particular kind of experience. But someone else is doing that in the gym, and someone else is doing that in a sales meeting, and somebody else is doing it in a discussion in a bar. You're right. So, but again, these we can start putting red lines down, like this is hypnosis and this isn't hypnosis. You rapidly get boxed in if you do that. There is a value, if you like, in tapping into existing expectations and sometimes living up to them. Even if a person has misconceptions about hypnosis, then it doesn't matter, even if there's a bit of fear or anxiety about it, because you're now in the game. But if someone says, oh no, I'm scared of that, I could get stuck in a trance, then they've thrown the ball back. You're now at least in the game. You're going to start by tapping away on some of those misconceptions again, or perhaps living up to them. So, there are few things as fascinating as this, especially, right now, 2019, how many words can you just drop into a sentence like that and instantly grab everybody's attention and polarize opinion, and so forth and so on. It's still a bit of a magic word, and sometimes I use it and sometimes I don't.
Yeah, me too. So one of the things I would say is that one conversation can change our life, and I think nowhere is that more apparent than in hypnosis, right? So let's talk about using hypnosis for change work, using just the power of language to go in and change subconscious programs, or I don't even know how you refer to them. What's kind of the scientific or your theoretical principles on how we go in and create changes in people that really reverberate through their whole life?
Okay, well, I'm not promising to be scientific in what I'm going to say next, even though I'd encourage people to read the scientific journals, the Oxford Handbook of Hypnosis, the Handbook of Clinical Hypnosis. They're excellent, and they will give you a good summary of the various scientific positions and theories about hypnosis. What there's more consensus on is what we can do with it, what we can help people with. The vast majority of my work is essentially helping people in brief therapeutic interactions, sometimes between 1 and 3 sessions, to change habits, to let go of fears, especially automatic patterns of behavior like phobia, and to access resources which they may have struggled to tap into in certain places. So in simple terms, how do we do that? I see all of those behaviors simply as learnt behaviors. I mean, obviously they were learnt at some point. They may have been learnt through repetition because you thought it worthwhile to do so, like a smoking habit, or they may have been learnt via one event. Often a phobia is learned via one random event. And either way, it doesn't really matter. That behavior is now running automatically. So we could use language like a program or a subconscious program. Even cleaner than that, because it allows us to kind of sidestep, going on about the mind too much, is it's as if there is a part of you running this behavior. So that concept of parts can be found in many, many different styles of psychotherapy. Hypnosis, there's a couple of different routes into that. A guy called Charles Tebbets wrote upon it early. Virginia Satir kind of had a big influence on, the founders of NLP, and that parts language, I believe, comes via her contribution, or what they extracted from her work. It, as far as I'm concerned, is the cleanest way that I could satisfactorily ring fence or describe and simultaneously ring fence a single behavior that somebody has, especially one that they want to change that isn't yielding to their conscious effort of, I need to stop doing that. I mean, you could you could even argue that's not really a conscious effort to stop doing it. It's just part of the noise that goes along with that habit or that particular fear. So I see these things, just to say, like, dispassionately, I don't see any problem as being deep, complicated, or anything like that. It's just a learned behavior. And if I can frame it as a part of you, a bit like a loyal employee that just turns up 30 times a day and reminds you to smoke, or a overzealous bodyguard that just turns up every time you think about speaking in public, then using hypnosis, although we don't particularly need hypnosis, but using hypnotic techniques, I can negotiate with that part. And 99 times in 100, that negotiation goes as it would with a loyal employee. Hey, what are you doing for me? Well, I'm doing this. You asked me to. Do you remember? I've forgotten about that, but I don't want you to do that anymore. Can you do something else for me instead? And again, it sounds very abstract when we're discussing it this way, but you know, I've seen so many clients with different levels of intelligence and different amounts of self-awareness and knowledge, and they all understand this language. It's as if there's a part of you. So that's the core, if you like, of the system that my dad and I use. There are obviously other techniques, but that helps position the problem, and it helps define a potential solution. It's all abstract as far as I'm concerned. I don't really believe there is a part. I don't really believe there is a conscious and subconscious mind and in the way that we talk about it. But we have to use words to try and have dialogue about our experience. And these ones are clean enough. I don't need to get caught up in your inner child or this is, you know, this kind of complex. It's much easier than that. It's very light touch approach to change.
And those labels make it easy for us to understand, right? We understand that there's a part of us. In fact, I was talking to someone the other day who wants to quit smoking. And I said, well, do you really want to quit smoking? And she said, well, there's a part of me that wants to quit. Right. And I just thought back to the training, because there's parts of us, and, you know, training with Mike Mendel, he calls them ego states. And that gets a little more, a little deeper into the psychology aspect, but I don't even think you need that. Right. There's a part of me that wants to be healthy. There's a part of me that likes to smoke. And when you can get those two parts aligned and working together, you can resolve a lot of these things that people have no idea how to resolve.
Indeed. And that's one approach to parts therapy. Indeed, the book by Roy Hunter, Parts Therapy, a lot of that, which is quite a famous book on the subject, a lot of that makes this assumption there are two parts in conflict, one which wants to smoke and one which doesn't. Actually, the way that my dad and I normally work in the first session is not to assume conflict, but to simply address that part, like it is a loyal employee that will do what we ask it to do. So, you know, there's many ways of putting it to people in a way that will make sense. And I guess that any of those approaches could work. Again, if you want to call them an ego state, do that. But even that is putting slightly more definition on it than I would like to. You know, the ego, some people are not going to know what you're talking about. Perhaps most people are, but some of them will have baggage attached even to that word.
Sure.
They won't, and some will think it's a positive thing, and some will think it's a negative thing. And it you know, there's nothing wrong with it, but I try and work as cleanly as I can and use language essentially that a kid could understand.
So I think everybody that's listening that wants to change something about their life, something about their behavior, can relate to this fact that there's a part of them that does something, a part of them that wants to sleep in, a part of them that likes to work out, whatever it is that they want to change, and just go work on that specific part using hypnotic phenomenon and techniques, right?
And that's also how people experience their behaviors, especially the behaviors they'd like to change. The fact is, their conscious effort to do it hasn't worked, and they feel a struggle when they try and do that. They may have the experience of making a decision to have a cigarette. They may think, oh, it's 12 o'clock, I'm going to go and have a cigarette. Where's my tobacco? I'm just going to roll a cigarette. It all looks very much like someone making decisions and performing actions that would seem like choices. As far as I'm concerned, that is part of the cigarette. It's as automatic as the lug of the cigarette that you didn't even pay attention to. So, you know, that conscious effort often feels like willpower. It feels like, you know, I need to be strong. Can you boost my willpower? Again, that's not really how I work. It's not the frame I want my client to be in. This behavior is automatic. This fear, this phobic response is completely automatic. I'll often challenge people to try and develop a phobia of something in my office. You know, can you just teach me how to have a phobia of that lamp over there? And they'd laugh or look at me like I'm insane. Now, just take as long as you want. Anything that you think you could do to develop a fear of that, you just let me know. And there's nothing they could do because they're completely uninvolved in that process. They could smash themselves on the head with a lamp. They would still not have a phobia of that lamp. So part of it is helping the client not just get out of their own way, but to find a way of thinking about these behaviors where they're not down upon themselves for not having the strength and the willpower. They're not confused because they don't, you know, they have no clue how to interact with an unconscious part. Instead, we just behave like, no, this part's listening. You know, did you ever address it? Did you ever speak to it? Did you ever ask a question of it? I know it sounds crazy, but did you? And again, using various hypnotic phenomena, you can give people the experience that that part is responsive, communicative, and listening. It sounds crazy, but that's how it then feels. And that's, you know, that's just having dialogue with yourself. I quoted a friend of mine the other day, Michel-Ange K. He said, you know, self-harm is self-hypnosis and self-healing is self-hypnosis. You know, the fact is the person is already, if you like, maintaining their problem with automatic thoughts and behaviors. They may take ownership of them. Like, why did I do that again? You know, I'm not even enjoying this cigarette. But in fact, they can be, they can let them stop beating themselves up about that. They were uninvolved. You know, a 10-year-old made this decision, if that was any kind of decision at all. So yeah, you can just turn your attention upon your own behaviors, be curious and interested about your own dialogue and beliefs about it, kind of behave like, you know, it doesn't matter whether they're true or not. You probably heard my dad say that. You know, I don't really care if a belief is true or not. It's just whether it empowers me or not. And with what I find is when you're with a client or when you're doing this to yourself, if you can be empty and honest and just kind of, you know, dissociate from it for a moment and look at the behavior and look at how you present this to yourself inward, you shine a little light upon that. Those beliefs, they just don't fall over. The things you're saying to yourself are just sometimes I'll say they're just like stubby little sentences. I think Albert Ellis put it that way. You know, we think we're living like this ability we have to create and be musical and write poetry and fall in love and, you know, be an engineer. But when it comes to our own behaviors, we tend to just present a stubby little sentence. Often it's somebody else's, but you behave like that's it. We can get our hooks into that stuff and just begin to make change. And it's exactly the same with self-hypnosis. You don't have to worry about whether you're in a trance or how deep you are or whether you're really communicating with your, you know, subconscious mind. You can just begin like you're already doing it. Your problem is hypnosis. You know, so let's use what that's made of and just change some of those ingredients, and often you get a different result, and often immediately, you know.
And one thing I like that you do is instead of replacing the behavior, so let's say smoking, instead of saying, well, now you're going to chew gum, you let the client's unconscious mind come up with a new behavior, right? And you kind of give them that task, and then you do some work, and then you bring them back and, you know, have their unconscious mind give them that part of them a new behavior instead of smoking or eating or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, and bizarrely, the client doesn't really need to even be informed about what choices are being made. They may have that experience inwardly, but some don't. You know, often they'll just say, you know, what was happening there, or why was my finger moving? They rarely say, I've had a great idea. My unconscious has said, you know, do 20 press-ups instead of having a cigarette. So the point is, we can leave the CEO in the office. We can just say, okay, I'm going to go and speak to that department. I'm going to go and speak to the manager of that department. Is that okay? And we go and have this negotiation. So the key part is in terms of, you know, framing this, there's a person with thousands of behaviors, and we speak to a part that runs a single behavior with the assumption it has some intention. When we ask it to find new behaviors, it's not even so much about switching out that behavior. The important piece is ensuring that whatever its positive intention was, whatever it was trying to do, keep you safe, make you have more fun, make you feel part of a crowd, that can still be met in some way. So it doesn't, you know, again, it doesn't have to be a conscious effort. It doesn't have to be an experience that the client even feels that involved with. And again, we'll often use this language of the unconscious doing it for you, or your creative mind coming up with new choices. As we say these sort of utterances, again, they're just heard. They just make sense. It's as if there is a part of me that's creative and could come up with choices. You know, is there? I don't really know, but I'm happy. Language is always going to be kind of metaphorical. We've already kind of climbed down at least one step. So keep it clean, and you can normally, you know, certainly I expect my clients to benefit from the first session. You know, even if there's more work to do, more work for me, more work for them, I expect them to benefit, because it's likely that this approach isn't something they've done before. They haven't entered into kind of dialogue with themselves in this way before. And that's really how I see self-hypnosis. It's not going through some portal into a special state. It's having dialogue with yourself and playing with it, and seeing what happens when you make different suggestions to yourself. Yeah.
I like it. So, and another technique I like that you and your dad use is the time machine, right? And talk a little bit about that. You know, there's various timeline strategies, timeline. But you use the time machine. Talk a little bit about that protocol and what situations you use it in.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned timeline there, which is a technique by a sort of second generation NLP, you know, guru called Tad James, and I had that book very early on, and I actually spent about 3 or 4 years refusing to use the technique. Just like you can't just go back and, you know, to the darkest moment in a person's life and tell them to let go of every negative thought. But it turns out you can do that very effectively. And what was nice about timeline was you had this kind of dissociation built into it. So you could send people back to highly charged events from the past, you know, things that they spent their life trying not to think about, and they could still have some sense of dissociation, essentially feel strong enough and distanced enough to be able to get through it. But there are a few things about that technique that my dad and I just found to be slightly superfluous. So my dad's way of doing it is kind of how I would do it now. Again, it's an imaginative process where it's certainly not regression. Let me just make this clear as well. To regress, you know, is not just to remember. To regress typically involves someone going there and almost feeling you know, that they are that age and speaking from that place and feeling everything they felt in that moment. There's no reason to do that, and there are strong arguments not to do that. That would be, you know, bad therapy. Certainly, if that were the backbone of a system. If that's what you're doing to someone week in, week out, you're punishing them. Actually, you're exploiting them financially, and you could occasionally do a bit of good work, but most of the time, that kind of mental archaeology, we should question that. The science has made it clear you're not actually regressing. You're just dragging someone through in this way. We don't regress. However, if you were to go back to that highly charged event, perhaps the original event where a behavior started or a fear was, you know, born, with the strengths and understandings you have now, what you know now as an adult, what someone else might know as a mother or a grandmother or a man or a boss or a friend, and you were to go back to that younger you, then you can almost rewrite the end. It doesn't mean just scrub the event out of their mind. It means let's look at it again. Let's finish this. You know, let's get to the end of this, and let's thank that younger you. Let them know they survived it. Tell them exactly what they need to hear. And I'm going to behave like the past is not fixed. If imaginatively we do that and we complete an event, or we make adjustments to it, we add better information to it, it's as if everything can transform between then and now. In exactly the same way, if we want to kind of think about the future, if we, you know, everyone likes to set goals these days, but if we were to go there and look from there, not just, you know, the top of the mountain view, but look back at the skills that we acquired, the contingencies that we put in place, the efforts we made to deal with blocks along the way and that kind of stuff, then we can find ourselves in a more informed position. So this timeline, if you want to call it that, I generally just call it space-time now. Like, you know, you can go anywhere in space-time. And my dad will use this image of a time machine. To me, that's perfect, because you're sheltered, you have a sense of control, it's kind of fun. You can go anywhere, anytime, and you can change the past, and you can begin to script the future, and you can learn from the points in between. So that's not certainly not the hub of what I do. As much as possible, I avoid spending too much time thinking about the past. This is, you know, this approach is, I mean, everything's a buzzword, but this is solution focused. It's outcome orientated. That's where I want us to keep our compass and keep our eye on. And if every now and again something comes up, then we have techniques that take minutes to apply. They're not going to traumatize you. They're not going to disrupt our session, and we can just do that, make adjustments to that. So yeah.
How long is your average hypnotherapy session?
The first session, I guess, is about 75 minutes. Perhaps the first 10 minutes are, you know, it's establishing a goal and asking questions. We then have a discussion. During that discussion, it may feel like a discussion. I guess I'm doing most of the talking, but I'm trying to achieve a number of things. I'm trying to challenge, ideally undermine or break the beliefs that I think support your problem. I can't do it. It's going to be hard because I'm addicted to nicotine. It helps me relax. It's the only thing that does that. They're beliefs. They're not necessarily truths. So I'm going to try and undermine those kind of beliefs, change them to ones that are more useful. I'm going to, you know, alliance. An important part of that is that the client, because of what you've said, can now conceive of their problem in a particular way, and they have some simple notion of what you're going to do, what your techniques or approach is to changing that, and it should make sense to them. So by the time we've done that, and queued up the hypnosis and a couple of things that are going to occur. That could take anything from 15 to 45 minutes, depending on what I'm dealing with. And then when it comes to, if you like, the hypnosis part of the session, not that that distinction makes any sense to me anymore. The whole thing is one continuous piece. It's exactly the same in performance. The whole thing is one continuous suggestion game. But, I do an induction and we do the work. That normally takes about, 25 to 35 minutes, depending on what I'm doing. So, perhaps the whole thing is somewhere between 70 and 90 minutes. After that, the sessions tend to be a little bit shorter. However, I'm a big advocate of, even if you have 5 minutes, have a go, because I've just been doing this long enough, hanging around with my dad certainly for long enough, that I know for a fact 5 minutes can be enough, and that change can be lasting. Suggestion isn't something that wears off. It's kind of classic notion. People often ask, but how long does it last, or how long till it wears off? It's not like that. If you're over the fear, just like if you're over your ex, it's no longer bothering you. It's okay now. So you've changed. That's the way I look at it. And for that reason, again, early on, I'd say, if I was out in a bar and someone told me they got their driving test the next day and they were anxious last time and they're shaking, if it wasn't going to happen that they were going to come to my session and come to my office, then of course I would try and do something.
Yeah.
And I'd try and do something between them ordering their drink and getting their drink. It's not that it's a race, but I know that it's worth having a tap, that sometimes the thing just yields with even one bit of attention. And again, you don't have to call it rapid or this. It looks miraculous. It does look like miracles on demand. Sometimes it's 100% effective. Sometimes it gives the person enough space, 5 minutes of being pain-free, to realize, I can get the tip of a lever underneath this. I can see now that I should be able to conceive of a complete change. So, always have a go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And watching you and your dad has definitely inspired me in different situations to just give it a go. And, sometimes it's been like, holy cow, I can't believe that just worked in such a short amount of time. And it's pretty amazing. And I definitely love all your content I've consumed, your book, your dad's book, and train with you guys. So it's made a big impact on the work that I do.
No, that's good, man. I'm glad to hear it. I know you've got lots of different avenues to where you can apply it. And, and that point you just made there about, wow, that worked. When you've, especially like you've invested in many different training courses, you've learned a lot of techniques. And sometimes when we run a technique, my dad's arrow technique is a good example. It is a great technique. There's no question about it. But when I do that, rather than, then thinking, wow, it's the technique, it's more that the technique reminded me that I can remind people that change is possible, because almost anything works. I don't want to undermine, our own efforts to put some techniques out there. We believe in them. We stand behind them. I want people to learn them. But the reality is, the important piece is being able to communicate that can change, that you have the resources to do this. Look, let me show you something. And that's why there've been agents of change, for millennia, who have appeared to occasionally drop a miracle on demand, because they asked, they put in that request or that suggestion or that question or an answer, and it shifted. So, that kind of stuff just keeps it ever fresh for me. I'm still stunned when someone's in chronic pain and 5 minutes later they're not. I've done plenty of that work, but I've seen my dad do that hundreds of times. And you know what he's like. He has no doubts, or if he does, he
Yeah.
keeps himself,
Yeah.
you know. But I've seen it so often that it's undeniable. And yes, you know, critics might say, well, it's confirmation bias. You're only remembering the wins, and perhaps they were just ready to change. And perhaps all of that's true. But if you can, you know, find the gumption to just have a go, to just do an intervention, whatever it is you're doing, whether you're a sports coach or you're a nurse trying to help someone, or you're a parent or whatever, if just have a go, and you will see that, you know, as one of my heroes said, the world is made of words. You know, if you know the words that the world is made of, you can make of it whatever you wish. Our personal reality is maintained with language, and our language is defining our personal experience. It's like a continuous kind of loop, and we can intervene. There are lots of different places we can do that. We can do it physically, we can do it in here imaginatively. You know, there are lots of different threads that we can pull at, and the real joy of it is you honestly don't need to be a psychologist with a deep understanding of the psyche or the human condition or this particular problem. You can keep it simple, keep it clean, and I'm an advocate that, you know, almost everyone should get their hands on this stuff. It's much more. It's much easier to yield, and it's much more normal in terms of the framing than many people imagine from the outside looking in.
Absolutely. And the problem is it can be as complicated as you want it to be as well. And so that's what I love about you and your dad, is that you make it simple, easy to use, easy to navigate, and then easy to make that impact. So we've gotten through a bunch of hypnosis stuff. What are you working on now? What are you excited about now?
I'm working on, let me just think about what I'm working on now. I'm 7 months into a webinar series. So it's a year-long webinar series, mostly focused on self-hypnosis, but a very kind of experimental approach. I encourage people to think of themselves as like a self-hypnosis laboratory, and to think of their self-hypnosis ability as a skill. And wherever they're at, you know, a bit like fitness, if you can't do a single push-up, it doesn't matter. We can start with one with your knees on the floor, or we can lift a couple of weights or something. If you see self-hypnosis as a skill that you can get better at, then you can learn to change so many aspects of your personal reality. Get rid of stuff you don't want, turn up in the way that you'd wish to, get the most out of, you know, the good experiences, food, theater, music, whatever. You can change the way you think, feel, and respond. So I'm into that. I enjoy doing these webinars, partly because they stretch me. They encourage me to go deeper than I have before into each of these topics. So that's been good. I'm speaking on that topic in November at the UK Hypnosis Convention, which is like by far the biggest convention in the UK, but it's non-denominational. All sorts of different speakers are there. Whether you're a beginner or experienced, I would encourage you to go to that. It's a very, very good convention. I think it's around November the 5th, or the weekend of November the 5th this year. I'm giving the keynote for that. So I'm doing that. I'm also working with a couple of different companies looking at clinical applications for VR experiences, where we essentially combine VR data from biosensors, so iWatch, Fitbit, EEG, different heart rate monitors, skin galvanizing responses, tying those two together, but adding suggestion to that. That again, not even really framing it as hypnosis at all, but giving people these tools straight out of the kind of hypnosis toolkit to enhance those kind of experience. Again, there's stuff there. I'm no expert in VR, but you know, I've had some demonstrations right now, and it is completely mind-blowing. It's far more than, you know, just roaming around a land of dinosaurs or something. It's crazy what's happening there, and I just don't think we can afford to ignore it. I think we need to embrace that kind of technology because it is going to replace us. In the meantime, we need to make the most of that. So I'm doing that. Yeah, and I'm still performing. I spend summer mostly at music festivals, just roaming, doing performance hypnosis and magic, things like that. And I'm hoping to go back to India later in the year and do a little tour.
I heard you were a big celebrity there, aren't you?
It's insane. There's a lot of people there, put it that way. And building size banners must come cheap. But yeah, it was my first show in India and there were like 600 people there. And the vast majority had never seen stage hypnosis. They'd barely heard of it. And they got into it. My other main obsession is Brazil. I love Brazil and Brazilians and everything about the place. And Brazil has like the biggest, market or fastest growing market for hypnosis right now, mostly because of a friend of mine, Alberto Rezende, who you may have met in Vegas. He's created a generation of hypnotists. Many of them are teaching, but they're just so open to the experience and supportive of each other that it's the healthiest kind of hypnosis scene I've come across. And I've been into like Brazilian music for years and years, but the last 3-4 years I've started to go. So I'm going back there in October. It's a new convention. It's second year actually. It's called Hypno Bahia, up on the kind of northeast side of Brazil, in Salvador, which is, a massive cultural melting pot. So yeah, I mean, it all sounds pretty random, man, but my days are split. I do a bit of therapy just as I have done locally. It's not like I'm known locally. I'm just another hypnotist who does some sessions here and there. I do a fair bit of training, probably do 5 or 6 courses in the UK each year and maybe a dozen courses in different parts of the world. And, I just explore this stuff myself. I'm busy creating a hypnosis training platform similar to Mike and Chris's academy. My dad and I have been training for nearly 20 years. So we should have really got round to that by now. So with Chris's help, and a shove in that direction, we're nearly there. So we should be launching that in the next month or so. It's got experiences that you can have just by watching. There are demonstrations from courses. There are real therapy sessions. Our quit smoking protocol and everything else is going to be featured in there. So I kind of want to get that done and out of the way. That's my main focus right now, just so that everything can then just pour into there and we can maintain that for a while. So yeah, there's a few things going on.
So yeah, you got your hands full. Last question. What's the most transformational experience that you've ever had personally, whether that was you getting hypnotized or training you've done or some kind of transcendental experience for you?
I use this stuff whenever I'm going to perform, mostly because it's not the most natural place for me to be. So if I'm ever going to go on stage, give a lecture, give a presentation, that kind of stuff, I'm going to experience the same, range and flux of emotions that most people are. But when that stuff comes up, I tend to be curious about it and like, there you are. Just get into dialogue with myself. I find when I do that, and especially if I bother to kind of use techniques for rehearsal of what I plan to do, that can be a bit spooky. It's literally like words just start coming out and the timings that you'd planned are absolutely bang on and things like that. So I sometimes find that not quite transcendental, but you do become a slight observer to yourself when it's just coming out and you can just hit any question comfortably and any deviation from the plan can suddenly be accommodated. So I do a lot of that. The thing that still blows my mind more than any other is helping people who are in chronic pain. I've just seen that transform so often now that, it's a responsibility, because, you know, when someone's in chronic pain, especially if they've had it for years, sometimes decades, to just say, you know, well, in a moment you will no longer be able to feel that, can seem a bit flippant. But I've seen that shift so often now that, again, I can't say that I fully understand why that can happen and why it could be maintained in a way for so long, but I know it can. I'm prepared to go there and point a technique or techniques at it. And when that shifts, you know, fortunately I haven't had to do that for myself, but when that shifts in another person, and it's something that they really define as being physical and mechanical and fixed, then again, I just let that remind me, and that reminder kind of echo throughout my system, that nothing is fixed in this way. Any emotional issue, pattern, block, can dissolve, and even more than being overcome, it can. So when I'm working with people, you know, that's the benefit I get from it. I don't. Again, you're still a human being. Things are still going to come up that you learned way back that get triggered. You're still going to have behaviors that come out that you know, could regret afterwards, of course. But what you don't have is the excuse for those things to kind of elude examination. If you're going to be honest with yourself, you know, and see that flash of anger or that tendency to wind somebody up, especially loved ones, you know, that's often what we do, then turn the lens upon yourself and see what happens. So, yeah, you know, there've been a few things that certainly things that have surprised me in the past, but there are things that still continue to, again, keep it fresh for me. I never get complacent about it. It's, you know, how many jobs can you do for 20 years that still consistently surprise you? You know, this is one.
And it kind of ties back into your book title, right? Reality is plastic. And when you are able to change someone's life just like that, it reminds you, and it's kind of like, kind of shakes you a little bit, like, oh, it still amazes me, right? It's still, you still see it with fresh eyes.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, even when I first wrote that title, to be honest, was just a random utterance on that Hypno Survival video after I'd turned the guy, I'd become Denzel Washington, because I was in there for like 20, 30 minutes. I gave him an autograph. I'd just say, just run to the bar and get me a beer. I went behind the bar. I'm pretty sure I could have emptied the till if I'd asked him to. He was talking about my movies. And afterwards I was like, his reality is entirely plastic. That then, you know, became the best effort for a title. But since then, you know, if I had a belief, it is that. It's that all we really have access to is our personal reality. If there is a reality, you know, it's not necessarily it, but it's the only one that we access. And any aspect of it can be changed. That's what's happening anyway. That's how we learn. That's how we get through stuff. You could hear a word, a sentence from someone, you know, just randomly, and not a hypnotist, it could completely shake you up or make your day or whatever. So I behave like, that plasticity exists, and is actually quite easy to, it's far more accessible than we may realize. The vast majority of our behaviors I look at as habit, you know, even if we have the experience of choosing.
Sure.
We're just doing a little dance in the coffee shop when we look at the thing and say, oh, I'll have a soya flat white or whatever it is. You're probably going to make the same decision you made last time, because even that decision, even that thought was automatic. So yeah, I mean, that stuff, it gets a bit more philosophical at that point. I'm not suggesting I've got answers, but that has kind of led me, I guess, to, you know, having the same inquisitive and curious approach about deeper notions of the self, of, you know, this sense of being a thinking, active I in here, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. And again, if you do that kind of examination, it can shake you up a little bit, but it can also be liberating. It can allow you to stop chasing symptoms, and instead to just see them as little bubbles of behavior that are running automatically, and to almost give them a space with which they can play out. So, you know, that kind of stuff keeps me interested. It's about the only thing that takes my mind off of hypnosis.
Yeah, and I think, you know, disassociating from the behaviors and observing them and observing yourself and how you interact with the world, I know is something that interests me, and it interests you as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. There's, you know, examining your nature, you know, and using questions that on the surface, I mean, they're ancient questions. They've been asked for a long time. I guess until I got into this, I wouldn't have, it's not, they just wouldn't have resonated. You know, most people at some point are going to ask questions like, what am I doing here? And what's life all about? And who am I? But they'll often just let those questions just disappear. If you use questions like that as your blade of inquiry, which again, when I was with you in Toronto, we spoke a little bit about Advaita or non-duality. There's a proliferation of teachers talking about this. You know, it's not a religion, it's a philosophy, it's a way of approaching, it's a rigorous examination of your own nature. If you use questions like that, then you can not just have experiences, but you can come to a different understanding about your nature, and one that can, again, show you that your nature is at peace, that it's entirely natural to be connected, to have a sense of connection with people and nature, and to recognize that you're not lacking anything. You're happy, you know, and that is fundamentally different from trying to get into a state of happiness or trying to feel peaceful in a situation that is agitating you. It's like examining the backdrop and seeing that the backdrop is in fine shape, that actually it couldn't be, that it's intact, that it couldn't be broken. So, you know, it gets a bit lofty, I guess, at that point, but I get a great deal out of this kind of inquiry, and it's almost like the hypnosis of the self. You know, it's the self part of self-hypnosis gets ignored. That's what I'm really interested in. You know, everyone's focused on the hypnosis, like it's self-evident what I am. You know, we don't need to examine that. But when you do, so rather than turning your lens upon a symptom, when you turn a lens on who is this problem for, or where am I experiencing that? Questions that almost sound like a little koan, they sound like a little puzzle. You know, where am I experiencing that anxiety? They can turn into a very sophisticated and refined tool of examination. You just stay with the question. So yeah, that's had a big impact on my, you know, my happiness.
So most of us, and you know, even me, and I'm sure even you at times, we feel disconnected from our purpose, ourselves, our joy, our happiness. And I think what this is about is that we can step back and observe those programs, that anxiety, that discontentment as being outside of the self, right? Because our self is maybe
certainly
perfect, whole, and complete. And we have these programs that put a shield up. How do we just observe those, right?
Yeah, we mistake our behaviors for who we are. You know, even on the kind of regular level of conversation, people will say, well, you know, I'm an anxious person. You know, again, it seems like a reasonable statement. Plenty of people would make it. But that kind of statement is what I mean when we're supporting the problem. We're supporting it at this point at a sort of identity level. You know, so, you know, you are not your thoughts. I mean, let alone your problems. You're not your feelings. Those things are all transient. They are all going to come and go. They're changing. They're produced automatically. They disappear automatically. They get replaced by others. None of them are you. So this kind of inquiry is a cutting tool. It starts off as a path of exclusion, and again, in traditional terms for the last few thousand years, that would be called neti, a kind of cutting away, and not this, not that, not this, not that kind of process. And then if you're not any of these things, then it's like, well, what is this? What qualities does it have? And it may not have objective qualities in the usual sense, but there is something of a revelation there that the qualities it has, again, give you a pointing, a clue with regard to this intact nature of yourself. So it's like self-remembering, whereas doing that problem was, or mistaking ourselves for that kind of person was a forgetting. So it's a useful practice. I think there's crossover with hypnosis, not in the sense of we often think of hypnosis as the state and all that kind of stuff that goes on afterwards, but more as hypnosis being, our default position to self-suggest our personal reality. Someone recently put it to me, it's like at the end of the day, it's as if we reconsolidate ourselves, with all of we can automatically select from a bunch of those events and experiences, and it's as if we reconsolidate each day, and mostly in exactly the same form and fashion. So I mean, hypnosis is like it just never keeps it never runs out. It just keeps giving up another facet. You just think you've got it and you've sussed it all out, and it turns in the light, and it's like, it's gonna take over that aspect of my life now as well.
I've done 6 weeks of hypnosis training in the last year and a half, probably, not counting the books I've read, and it just keeps going deeper, and there's more layers, and it's so much fun, but I got to remember to keep it simple as well.
That it is. That is important. It's worth just. And again, self-applying. Yes, we can do this stuff to others, but self-apply wherever you're at as a subject. Self-apply as if this can work, and be interested in the result, even if the result is no result. Just be, that's interesting. I wonder what would happen if I tried that again. I wonder what would happen if I did that from this perspective. I wonder what would happen if I tried this instead. And be sensitive and self-aware enough to recognize when you're getting a bit of traction, even if it's a little bit. That way, you can really begin to play with, your own personal reality. Like it's a fiction. Good. I'll have a new fiction. I'll have another fiction. That's fine.
Yeah, great. I actually just did some self-hypnosis like about half an hour before this call. So, I appreciate your time. We've gone way over what I told you, what I had you commit to. So I really appreciate the extra time and all your deep insights. And I'm looking forward to seeing you.
Let's do this again sometime.
Looking forward to seeing you at a training in the near future, I'm sure, somewhere.
Yeah. And if you come over to the UK, just give me a buzz.
I might have to make that happen.
All right.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Nick. See ya.